So my talk today is on self-love and self-care. And I want to start with a story I heard, a true story, about the Dalai Lama on one of his first visits to America after he was exiled. And he came with a bunch of his monks, and he gathered together all his teachers throughout the land. And he just wanted to make sure they were teaching the meditations the way he wanted them taught. And so he said, okay, so the first meditation is the basic meditation. So you have people sit until they can count their breaths to 25 and do that time and time again. And then we move on to the next meditation, which has to do with compassion and how they build a ball of compassion in front of them and how they then send it out into the world. And one of the teachers timidly raised her hand and said, "Great teacher, is it okay that we teach it a little different here and that we allow them first to bring the compassion into themselves before they send it out to the world, because they don't seem to like themselves very much here, and so we think that that will help?" And Dalai Lama said, "Huh?" And so the teacher repeated herself, and said, "They don't seem to like themselves here." And so it turned out that didn't translate, not liking oneself, into Tibetan. The Dalai Lama had never heard of that phenomena. And so from that moment, he set his people up to do a survey of the world to see how prevalent there was in the world people not liking themselves. And it turned out nobody didn't like themselves as much as us in the world. That really struck me when I heard that story. And I looked at my own life, and I grew up in a generation where corporal punishment was pretty prevalent. I had 160 IQ. First time I was tested, I had 160 IQ. From that moment forward, my life became a mess. Because my parents thought, well, 160 IQ, let's move them through. And so they put me in school a year early. Emotionally, I was nowhere near ready. In first grade, when the teacher said, you have to stay seated in your seat, I thought she was kidding. And so let her chase me all around the room while the teachers laughed, only to go home that evening and get beaten senseless. In fact, every single report card that came home, I was beaten because they all said the same thing. This kid's got such a high IQ. Why is he performing the way he is, and why can't he sit still? Why is he such a troublemaker in class? And I didn't know I was a troublemaker. I just knew that nobody liked me. The teachers didn't like me. The other kids thought I was weird. By the time I was 12, this is getting to know your minister day, I was started taking drugs. By the time I was 14, I was a drug addict. By the time I was 17, both my parents, who were divorced at the time, said, "We don't want you." And they both kicked me, and neither one wanted me, so I was out on my own. My grandmother set me up in a house by myself where I went to high school to finish high school. And the last day of high school, the principal called me and said, "You didn't do the work to graduate, but we don't want you here, so we're graduating you anyway." And so I went out into the world with pretty low self-esteem. So when I heard this story, it made perfect sense to me, given how I was raised. That lack of self-esteem followed me for decades, until I found science of mind. I tried meditation. I was in therapy. It wasn't like I didn't go around and try different things, but something about science of mind, something about the idea that this is a teaching where we are more than just these people being knocked around in life, but actually have the power of God within us to take responsibility for ourselves in a way. And then I was like, wait a minute, responsibility for me getting beaten as a kid? And my teacher said, well, you don't have to take responsibility for that, but then how are you going to grow past love to the place where you can start loving yourself? I said, how do I get to loving myself? By taking responsibility for being beaten and put down all those years and being ostracized by the other kids. And my teacher said, well, you start by loving yourself. And I was like, how do you do that? And so, besides taking classes, I was given some really interesting exercises to start working with for myself. The simplest one was simply looking in the mirror every day and looking into my own eyes and going, I love you. Now, I got to tell you, that was really hard for me at first. Here I am in the bathroom all by myself and still am feeling embarrassed to look in my own eyes and say, I love you, when there's nobody around. Now, lots of us, I know, like putting on the music loud, get naked when we're alone, dance in front of the mirror and all this stuff. I was nowhere near being able to do anything like that. But that's where I started. I started in my first class. I went to my first class not because I thought the teaching could actually help me in science of mind. I actually went because I liked John Waterhouse and just wanted to hang around him more. And so I went and I started taking these classes, and it got me to open my eyes a little bit more to the idea that I could love myself, that I could feel good by taking responsibility for my past, that actually through taking responsibility, where this could actually lead me was to some self-care and self-love. And I want to be clear that I know that there are people out there who really think of self-care as just a part of self-love, but that my personal definition is anything that has to do with self-love, if it's an action, it's self-care. So the two are very synonymous for me. So we are a civilization, a country of self-sacrifice. We are the only country that believes in self-sacrifice the way we do and are proud of it. But we are also one of the most unhappiest countries in the world. So I'm not so sure that self-sacrifice has worked for us the way we think it has. I know it hasn't for me, because what happens for me with self-sacrifice is it normally leads to a couple of things: burnout and resentment. I've noticed that the one thing it rarely leads to is happiness. The airlines, they tell you every single time you fly that if there's no oxygen in the cockpit and the masks drop, put on your own mask first. Because if you don't, you're going to wind up unconscious and not be able to help anybody. And so self-care and self-love turns out to be the basis for anything else that goes on that may grow and touch other people's lives. And then once we get into that pattern of taking care of ourselves, then when we take care of others, we're coming from a much more powerful place, and that care we are doing actually grows. Right? But it starts in here with ourselves. So one of the questions I like to ask myself a lot is how can I love myself now, in this moment? And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how most of the times I wind up asking myself that question is when I'm already upset. When I've already reached a place of not taking care of myself enough where I'm now upset. And the upset kind of rings in my head and goes, oh, it's time to ask myself that question. How can I love myself now? When in fact, if I had been asking myself, one of the things we do is overwork in this country, right? How many people here feel overworked? Some, okay, all right? That happens because we allow it. We think it's because we're being forced to. But I have to tell you that the more I have learned about self-love in my life, the more I have learned I have way more power over how hard I work and when I work and how effective that work is. Here's one of the most amazing things I have learned about loving myself in balance. That if I don't overwork, I am way more effective and get way more done. That when I am overworked, I actually get less done and usually have to redo something I did because I'm tired and did it wrong, so I have to do it again. You ever have that happen? Well, that's what happens when we don't take the time to stop during that busy day. One of the things they discovered at 3M, which is this incredible company, one of the companies focused on in a book called In Search of Excellence. How they learned to be an excellent company is instead of getting on their workers' case when they took time off during the day to go to the water cooler and hang out with their buddies in other departments and stuff, they found out that that's where the best ideas popped up. That actually water cooler time was when some of the best stuff happened that was creative that then led to other great things happening in the company. So they actually started setting up situations so people could do that more. Take breaks more often because they found them to be so creative and so useful. And yet we don't do that in our own lives. And by doing that, they became one of the best countries in the land. So taking the time out to take a break. I used to be much better. I used to be like clockwork, set actually my alarm to go off like every 20, 30 minutes to make sure I got up, make sure I took a break. I don't do that as much anymore, and I notice the difference when I don't. If I'm not getting up, taking those breaks, but what I am really good at is I don't push, right? So I work a lot on the computer, and when I come up against something against the computer, if that computer's fighting back, like crashing or doing this or the other, I know it's time to stop. I don't go, oh no, I have to get this done, I got a deadline, yada, 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 I have to push through this, keep trying to make that thing work, boom, boom. You hear that sound? That's what it feels like when you're hitting your head against the wall. Has anybody here ever done that? When you hear the sound of hitting your head against the wall, take a break. And yet most of us don't, because we have this thing built into us. No, I have to be good enough. I have to do this. I have to be the hero of my own life, right? And I am all for being the hero, but not in a way that leads to self-sacrifice, not in a way that brings you down, not in a way that leads to burnout, because the last thing we need in life is burning out. What we want is building up. That's what we're here for, is to build up, to feel the beauty and brilliance of life and ourselves, to feel good about ourselves. And too much of us attach how we behave at work or in accomplishment or with this or with that or even with our kids, right? Anybody who's a parent knows you're going to screw up your kids. I don't care how hard you try. I don't care what you do. they're going to need some growing up at some point. And so you might as well relax. And here's another thing. You feel guilty about stuff? Let me tell you something about guilt. Guilt is a way to give yourself permission to do it again. It's not taking responsibility for changing what is going on. If you feel guilty about something, you're actually giving yourself permission to do it again. Anybody ever say sorry to you and then not recommit to not doing whatever they said sorry about? They just gave themselves permission to do it again. I don't let anybody say sorry to me unless they're willing to either commit or recommit to not doing whatever they're saying sorry about again, because otherwise they're just giving themselves permission. And that's a way to not feel good about ourselves, right? When you let somebody, your boss, your partner, or anybody speak to you in a way that is disrespectful without at least saying, that's not okay. Or like my wife likes to say to me, ouch. It's simple, it's straightforward, and reminds me, oh, that's not okay. You know, a simple ouch. She's great at that. You know, and then what happens with when we do love ourselves, what I notice is then we walk into a room and other people feel it. They are uplifted by our presence. When we are in moments of, you know how deeply you are loving yourself by how those are feeling about themselves around you. If you are the kind of person who when you walk into a room, others go, wow, I feel better about myself, you just being here, then you have accomplished a level of self-love that is great and worthwhile. My wife is one of those. Every room she walks in, people go, wow, and experience themselves better just being around her. I love that. I experience myself better being around her. Makes me want to be a better man. Makes me want to grow in this just being with her. You know, so that's what's really possible when we delve in and really get into a deep place of self-love by hugging ourselves. How many times a day do you actually take a moment to just hug yourself? Do it now. Just hug yourself. Love on yourself. You know, it's worthwhile. It's worth doing. It feels so darn good. That's what's possible, you know? We're all doing the best we can. One of the things I'm looking to do around here, I love the saying they have in yoga, right? Because I apply it to everything I do in my life. The saying is, go to your edge, smile. If you can't smile, back up. Go to your edge, smile. If you can't smile because it hurts too much, the position you're in, back up. You've gone past where you're loving yourself. So I apply that to everything I do. Once I stop smiling, I back up. Right? Because that's how I'm learning to love myself in this process. That's what's really possible here. Taking care of ourselves is not something to do after time off of work. Taking care of ourselves is during all day, regularly. The habit of remembering to love oneself. Because we don't have it in this country right now. But we can. This is what's possible for all of us. I know it. It's my stance, is that we can go from being the unhappiest country on the planet to being the happiest simply by remembering to love ourselves, by beginning a movement around that. Instead of asking somebody what they do wrong or this or that. How are you doing with loving yourself right now? How am I doing with loving myself right now? Imagine a world like that where those are the things we're asking in ourselves and others. I stand for that. I stand for you for that. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. All right. This is the time where I ask you to give. I ask you to reach deep into your pockets and support this ministry so that we can reach out to all of Los Angeles, so that we can fill this place, fill Los Angeles with love. Coming out of here. Can you feel that? Yes. That's what we're about. We're about God as the source. We're about God being the I am. And that money flows, flows and flows. And the way you get it flowing is to give so that you can receive multiplied abundantly. So repeat with me our affirmation. God is the source of all. Whoa. We lost it. Let's see if we can get back. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What we give, we receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am.
You are the face of God. I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the face of God. You are the face of God. I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the face of God.